Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and get started. As you may notice, I'm recording this video. So I'm also, once we're done, you're going to get a copy of the slide deck. So you should have access to all the stuff we're going to talk about. And also, I put together at the end a nice little works cited and reading list. If there's anything that we talk about that you'd like to learn more about or think more about or read up on, you can do that there. My name is Jessica Critten, and I am an instructional consultant with the Office of Digital Education at the University of Colorado. I'm going to real quick start my video. Hi, I'm a real person. I'm not going to have the video on for most of the session to save bandwidth and also so I can project the presentation. But I did want to say hi in person. So there we go. Share my screen again. There we go. All right. So today we are going to be chatting about designing for engagement and academic integrity. I'm going to start out though by I guess telling you a little bit about myself and where I'm coming from and what I do. I've been with the Office of Digital Education here for about 4 months. Before that, I was a librarian and an adjunct instructor for about 10 years. And in that time, I taught a ton. I taught my own classes, my own semester-long classes, but the majority of the teaching that I did was in guest lectures for classes of all different disciplines, all different levels. And a lot of the times I was asked to come into these classes and talk to students about plagiarism, what plagiarism is, and how do we cite things, and most importantly, to emphasize that if you plagiarize, horrible, horrible things will happen to you. It's the worst thing that you could ever possibly do. And as a result of that, a lot of the conversations that I had with students was them asking me, is this plagiarism? Is this plagiarism? Did I cite this correctly? Where does the period go? How do we italicize this and that? And is this right? And those interactions as a whole just made me kind of sad because I could tell that students were scared and their priority was not messing up, especially if messing up meant basically the end of their whole academic future. And really, they were missing the point of the whole assignment, which was to demonstrate what they learned and to find something that they're really passionate about. That's always kind of been in the back of my mind. So I was putting together this webinar. It's really sort of inspired by those interactions with students. And so what I'm hoping to get out of our time together today is for us to really think about what our design communicates to students and how we can sort of make adjustments that the way that we're oriented and the way that we design and what we're aiming for is less about punishment and more about empathy and learning. I should say also, my amazing colleague Braden is here with me. Throughout the time that we have together, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for us to have conversations, and I want to encourage you to engage in whatever way you feel comfortable with. If that's adding things to the chat, if that is unmuting and speaking, that's totally fine. Braden's going to be monitoring the chat. I'm going to try to monitor the chat as best I can. But again, I recognize that this is a stressful time for us and for the world, and we all have things going on. So really, whatever level you're able to engage today is totally fine. Like I said, you'll have a recording of this that you can refer back to later if you need to. All right, so with that, also hopefully you all saw and took a little bit of time to have some quiet reflection about our prompt here, which is reflecting on a time, and that can be a specific class session, a specific discussion, or an assignment when you felt things went really well, your students were really engaged. And we're going to come back to this in just a little bit. All right. So here are our general agenda, our session goals, our outcomes, if you will. And those are to reflect on our approach to and our philosophy of academic responsibility or academic integrity and engagement in our courses. We're going to talk about some strategies for encouraging engagement. Sort of the main thesis of this presentation is that when we design our courses with an eye towards engagement, necessarily our students are going to be more, you're going to be engaged in more sort of academic responsibly academic behaviors. And we're going to look at that on the course design level and also on the assignment and the assessment level. And then we're going to talk about equity, privacy, and pedagogical concerns that relate to the use of proctoring and anti-plagiarism programs. Those are things like Proctorio and Turnitin. And I will say also, my approach to this is very similar to my approach to any sort of teaching thing that I do, which is I'm never so married to my content. I'm not necessarily like, I've got to get to everything on my list. If we are engaging in some good conversation, to me, that's more important than sort of what my plan is. So hopefully we will get to everything. I'm going to try to keep this to about an hour long of a session. But if we don't, again, you'll have the slide deck and you are welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions. All right, so I'm going to start out by talking about this book that I found that really, I think, gave some interesting context to this session. It's called Cheating Lessons, Learning from Academic Dishonesty by James M. Lang. If you are into SOTL stuff, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, James Lang might be familiar to you. He wrote Small Teaching and he co-wrote Small Teaching Online. So this is kind of his jam. This book, I think, if this is a subject that you're interested in, it's a really great read. And it starts out by giving some historical context to our understanding about academic dishonesty in higher education. I think that we think, maybe anecdotally, that students are just cheating more now than they ever have before, what with our access to the internet and things. But really, that's not necessarily the case, and the research doesn't bear that out. It's always kind of been an issue, but it's never really been as big of an issue as we seem to think it is. So Lang gives a kind of history of cheating in higher education, which is pretty interesting if that's something you're interested in. But he also sort of talks about the research that has been done as it relates to cheating in higher education. And he identifies what he calls dispositional factors for cheating. So that's research that focuses on who tends to cheat and why. And that can be everything from people who party a lot tend to cheat, or first-year students tend to cheat, that kind of scope of a research. And he doesn't talk about it in the book, but I think maybe another sort of dispositional factor that is interesting for us to think about are all of those things that we don't know is going on in our students' lives. Maybe they're tired, maybe they're working, maybe their parents are sick, maybe their children are sick, maybe they're sick. So all of these things that tend to make students cheat. But what the book is really focused on and what he's interested in, and really how we're going to go through the rest of the session, is by focusing on what he calls contextual factors. And those are really the things that we as instructors have control over. He asks, are there classroom structures and practices that tend to induce or reduce cheating? So what is it that we can do in the classroom? What practices tend to encourage academic integrity in students? Sort of his thesis statement for that is that designing for engagement and integrity, and that's really rather than designing to avoid academic dishonesty, is just better pedagogy. I would offer and kind of tweak that thesis and that framing to say that perhaps we should not be oriented towards sort of thinking about our classes and our assignments in terms of how do I design this thing to make sure that students don't cheat. Instead, I think it's helpful for us to think about how can we design our classes, how can we design our assignments to better engage students and encourage learning. That's a distinction I think that's really important to me. And I'm curious what your reactions to it are, if that distinction makes sense, sort of how you're oriented in your design. So I'm not going to design this test in terms of how can I make sure students don't cheat on it. Rather, I'm going to think about what am I trying to get out of this test? What do I want students to be able to do? So does anyone have any thoughts about that? Sort of what the effect maybe on students might be about framing our design in terms of how can we better engage students, as opposed to how can we design this assignment so students can't cheat on it. And if you want to weigh in, you can unmute yourself, or you can just add some thoughts to the chat.
I had a question about it. I can jump in really quick.
Yeah,
My question was, I was wondering if they are mutually exclusive or if there are smart ways to do both. And I'm kind of looking forward to your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I guess it is possible because everyone has a different approach to this, right? In my mind, for me personally, thinking about how do I create an environment for students to demonstrate what they've learned, it's not necessarily the same thing as almost pathologizing students, like assuming that they're going to cheat on something, and then how do I avoid that? But I'm wondering if we can maybe return to that question throughout this session to say, when I'm putting together a prompt for an essay, it's really sort of what comes first in your mind. Do I want to know what they're learning, or do I want to make sure that they're citing things correctly? I don't know if that answers your question. I think it really comes down to each person's context and their approach. But if other people want to weigh in, like maybe if they've done that successfully, or if they have sort of found a way to articulate that in their own design process, I would love to hear about that. And maybe even from you, is it Vineet?
Yeah, it's Vinit, and
Yeah.
thanks. That did help me out.
Awesome. So Charlotte says applying concepts to their own experiences. Absolutely. And we're going to come back to that in a little bit, sort of a strategy for sort of putting the learning in the forefront, as opposed to one of my previous colleagues has called it a pedagogy of punishment. So applying concepts to their own experience. I love that. Allison says emphasizing individual learning and growth versus emphasis on grades. We're going to come back to that too. You guys are on it. This is really fantastic. Right. So sort of putting at the forefront learning as opposed to punishment. The effect of that is you're sort of de-emphasizing grades, and that is a very difficult thing. I think students, if we talk about students being afraid in the learning experience, that's a lot of what they're afraid of is, I need to know what I have to do to get a particular grade. If I'm so focused on that, then I'm not necessarily thinking about what I'm supposed to be learning. Kim does a lot with case studies, so the material is applied to real life scenarios, authentic learning. I love this. Everyone, we're going to come back to all of these things. I love everything you're saying. Low stakes assignment reduces the need to cheat. And as we'll talk about in a second, Kim, low stakes assignments also give students an opportunity to practice and be successful. So one of the things we're going to talk about is motivation. Students are more motivated to engage when they feel like they can accomplish what they're setting out to accomplish. And having a low stakes assignment, having a practice test that you don't grade, just sort of helps settle students and get them sort of situated, and give them a better idea and more expectation about what they're supposed to be doing. So I love all of these. Thank you so much for sharing. So with that, I asked at sort of the top of things, the top of the session, for you to think about specific moments in your teaching when students were really engaged. Wayne, real quick, adds encouraging working together rather than punishing. I love that so much, because when we talk about teaching, right, so much of the context of those conversations are about preparing students for the quote unquote real world. I would say college is still the real world, but so much of that experience should be about working together rather than being punished for not turning a thing in on time. And how often are we really punished for not turning a thing in on time, honestly? Thank you so much for that, Wayne. So I'm wondering if we're sort of thinking about reorienting our design to engagement, creating environments for students to be engaged. I would like to hear from you all. Again, chat's fine. If you want to unmute and talk, that's also great. Like a specific thing, like tell me about a specific assignment, a specific prompt, a specific thing you did to facilitate a discussion when you felt like your students were really engaged. Charlotte mentioned Socratic style group discussions. So having a group discussion that's really focused on asking a lot of questions. Tell me why you think that. Build on that idea. Allison has a discussion prompt where students are asked to respond to ethical dilemmas. The uniqueness of the assignment plus the lack of a quote right answer really helps students be engaged. I love that. And also you're talking about ethical dilemmas. So you're sort of engaging students, and maybe then this is kind of related to your question. You are engaging students in an open-ended question where it could go a lot of places, where they can build on their experiences, but you're also doing that, talking specifically about ethical dilemmas, of which academic dishonesty is one. So is there a way we can engage students by having a conversation about what it means to be ethical? That might be a way to sort of bring together those two ideas. I'll share one of mine. I used to teach a course on like basically research skills, study skills. And I had a sociology professor do a guest lecture for students. And it was all about, her research was about teen mothers and teen pregnancy, specifically sort of in the wake of a lot of the like the teen mom shows on MTV. I don't know if any of you have seen those. But basically her research was that we assume, having all of these shows, that teen pregnancy and teen motherhood is increasing because we see more of these shows, but really those numbers are going down. And I just remember this professor talking about her research and showing clips from Teen Mom, which was a show that all of my students had seen, and sort of engaging them by having them sort of think about what their expectations were, and then using research to sort of engage with those expectations. And it felt like students were engaged because they were surprised. They were given information that was compelling and that was well reasoned, but that I think sort of made them rethink what they had already assumed. So they were engaged by bringing in media. They were engaged really like what Charlotte's talking about, those Socratic style group discussions. Why do you think this? So you assume that teen pregnancy is going up. Why do you think that? It was just a really interesting thing to watch. It wasn't necessarily anything that I did, except for bringing in this person who's brilliant, doing brilliant work. I always will kind of remember that session. Wayne adds, while students are exercising skills, we are introducing the students to, Wayne, can you tell me a little bit more about your engagement technique?
Well, generally, can you hear me, by the way?
Yep, you're doing great.
Okay, great. It's a economics class where they're expected to gain not only mathematics skills but also the ability to some analytical skills in experiment design or project design. And so I find they're most interested when they actually get to exercise in a lab environment what we've been telling them about during the course of the class. I don't know, it seems obvious, but actually it surprised me the degree to which they really just are craving the opportunity to do what we've been talking about in an environment where they can actually talk with their peers about what they're doing right or wrong or asking questions.
That's so great, Wayne. And I think that really nicely sets up this next section. Students sort of talking about engagement and sort of digging in more to what that means. There's a book, Student Engagement Techniques, a handbook for college faculty, and they talk about, there are a million theories that relate to motivation. And I have neither the time nor the bandwidth to get into all of them. At some point today, I want to stare at this beautiful snow. So what they're talking about in this book is the sort of intersection, as it relates to motivation, the intersection of expectation and value. And so this model holds that the effort that people are willing to expend on a task is the product of the degree to which they expect to be able to perform that task successfully and the degree to which they value the rewards, as well as the opportunity, Wayne, to engage in the processes involved in performing the task itself. So part of this is that expectation. So within that, there are self-efficacy theories. So if students think they can be successful, they're more likely to engage with the activity. So if we're talking about those low stakes assignments, if you do a bunch of those things successfully, then once you get to maybe a higher stakes assignment, you're more likely to engage with it because you've already been successful. You already know sort of what to expect. And there's also related to expectation, sort of self-worth theories. So this is when students fail, or if they fail, they'd rather attribute their failure to effort than to their ability. If I don't try very hard, that's why I failed, not because I'm not good enough or not smart enough. And the sort of value piece of this relates to intrinsic motivation. And oh gosh, what's his name? In cheating lessons, James Lang talks a lot about intrinsic motivation as being sort of one of the main pillars to avoid cheating and avoid academic dishonesty. And he, Barkley and Major here argue that intrinsic motivation can be achieved when students feel first autonomy, so self-determination and deciding what to do and how to do it. How am I going to spend my time? I get to decide what's important to me and what I value. Competence, so developing and exercising skills for manipulating and controlling the environment. And this is also, I think, related to when you talk about value, seeing the value in what you're doing. How is this meaningful to me? What am I going to get out of this? Why are we talking about this? When you're talking about an abstract analytical concept, then how does this actually look in a lab? How will this help me do my work better? And also relatedness. So this is affiliation with others through social relationships. And a lot of the way that we realize relatedness is through group work, through discussions, through things like that. I would like to sort of offer that although these things are laid out here in terms of how to motivate students in the classroom. Wayne, I love that you said it seems so obvious. It does. And I think that's because that's not a bad thing. I think it seems obvious to us because if we look at all of these things, this also relates to our motivation in basically every aspect of our life, certainly our own professional work lives, right? We feel more motivated to write an article if our last article got a revise and resubmit, right? If it got accepted. We feel more willing to take on a new committee role. If we have a work friend, if we have someone to talk through things with, sort of makes tough things better. So I think one of the takeaways from this, at least for me, is the things that motivate us also motivate our students. And we can use a lot of our own experiences when we design experiences for students. Real quick, if I can, I will not take long on this. So some of the thrilling and exciting ways that I've been spending my own quarantine here is by playing this game called Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. It's like a board game where you're solving crimes, basically. This is a game that can take like 4 to 5 hours. This is a picture of the game, and it includes all of the things that are involved in the game. So it takes place in like the 1880s, and you're working for Sherlock Holmes, and you have a case book, and someone gets murdered, and then you have to follow up with leads, and there are a bunch of newspapers that you have to go through to find clues, and sometimes someone's name is going to be mentioned. And so on the bottom right here, it's like the London directory. You have to look up people's names. It's super, listen, it's fun. I had a fun time. I enjoyed it. It's my kind of thing. But I will tell you, in each one of these case books, at the end is the entire case solved for you by Sherlock Holmes. That's kind of his deal. Not once, my partner and I playing this game, did we ever like look to the back to see if we were right. Not once did we just kind of like, well, I think it might be this, so I'm just going to check because, you know, I don't want to, for the next hour or two, follow the wrong lead or whatever. This is a super involved game, but in terms of motivation, we're motivated to play it. We're enjoying the experience of playing it. We're enjoying playing it together and sort of talking through our ideas. The first one we did was kind of an easy one. So we sort of knew how the game was played, and we were confident that we could figure out what the answer was. This was something that required quite a bit of effort, and that was kind of the point. When you get the answer at the end, it's because you put a lot of effort into it, a lot of work. It's an accomplishment. It felt good to go through the process. And, you know, we've played it and we've gotten things wrong at the end. And that's just kind of been fine, you know, because the joy of playing the game is the joy of discovery, of learning new things. So I talk about this to kind of find a way or try to concretize some of those ideas related to motivation. And I wonder if in your own lives, if there are things like this where you could easily just hop on the internet and look on Wikipedia and find the answer, and you choose not to because there's something about the process or there's something about the learning experience that's means more to you than finding what the answer is. All right, I'm going to take a little bit of water. While I take a drink, does anyone have any questions or thoughts about anything that we've chatted about so far? Okay, awesome. Let's move on. So we talked about in our agenda, one of the things that we want to work on or chat about are finding some sort of practical strategies. What does it look like practically? And since I work for the Office of Digital Education and online is so much our modality right now, I'd like for us to sort of brainstorm related to some course design principles, different things that we can do on the course design level to design for engagement, understanding that the effect of that is also designing for academic integrity. If students are engaged, if students are committed to the learning process, then necessarily they are going to be more academically responsible. So these are just some general principles that I've seen pop up quite a bit in the literature in terms of course design. So one of them is to clearly articulate what academic dishonesty looks like to you and why integrity is important. So going back to my example of talking with students about plagiarism, I got to a point where instead of saying, this is plagiarism, this is plagiarism, this is wrong, this is wrong, instead we sort of talk about what does it mean to give people credit? What does it mean to do work that has integrity, that you feel good about, to share ideas, to say where you got your ideas, to sort of walk through the process of how your ideas build on other people's ideas. So again, it's just sort of reorienting or reframing that conversation and sort of instead of being, here's everything that you've done wrong, it's this is why it's important to cite, those sorts of things. Another course design principle is to be present and be engaged yourself. And I think this means different things to different people. And I will, if I can, make a quick plug. On Friday, my colleague Lainey Hoffman and I are giving another webinar that talks just specifically about this idea of presence, how you create presence for students socially, your own teaching presence, and then how you can foster a cognitive presence for students that will help them learn more. Another course design principle for engagement is finding a way to create a community in your class. You are accountable to each other. Students are accountable to each other. Students have more trust in you and feel more accountable to you. Again, community is also where that process of learning takes place. Also explaining the purpose of and the logic behind your course design. This is why these ideas are in this order. This is why I'm having you do an essay. This is why we are demonstrating learning through a test. This is what I'm hoping you will get out of this lecture. This is why we are watching this video and not this video. There are a million of these, obviously. These are just a few. And what I'm hoping we can do now is if you have any other principles, so just like broader ideas and philosophies you want to share, that's great. But also specifically, these are all principles. What do they look like in practice in an online classroom? Like what actions are associated with each of these ideas? So I'm really interested what you have to say about that. Yeah, so Allison says getting buy-in from students so they are invested. What are some things that we can do in the classroom to get buy-in from students? I'll share one thing I've done in the past is having me and students get together and write our academic dishonesty statement for the syllabus. That way they can show to you what that idea means to them, but also if they had a part in putting together a policy, then they're more invested and they're more likely to sort of follow that policy. Charlotte, for their online classes, introduction video discussion boards, so they can get to know each other better and feel more comfortable communicating with each other. Yeah, that's so important when you're talking about both creating presence and creating a community. Having an introduction board at the beginning of the semester, it can be sort of talking about what they hope to get out of the class. It can also just be, here I am as a person and here's my dog. It's also great if you can, as the instructor, to create your own introduction video. Here I am, here's my house, here's my dog. I'm a real person, you know, I'm not like an intense rule monster. You can talk to me, I'm, you know, approachable, and that does a lot, I think, to build trust. Wayne says, could you also say to clearly articulate what academic honesty looks like rather than the negative? I love that. That's so much in the spirit of what we're talking about, Wayne. Thank you. I think probably more in the spirit than what is here. What does it mean to be academically honest? What does it mean to be ethical, not only in this class, but what does it mean to be ethical in your field, right? What does it mean to be ethical in the sciences? What does it mean to be ethical as a historian? That's fantastic. Charlotte suggests allowing students to choose groups, creating a group assignment with norms of how they'll work together, and allow them to choose from several options of case studies. This is so fantastic. So you're choosing groups. Groups will create a community. At the best of times, it allows them to be accountable to each other. I know that group work can be complicated sometimes, but and then also they can choose their group, and then they can also choose the project and the deliverables, which ideally would also make them invested.
You know, if you don't mind me just cutting in here, yeah. I found that I teach freshmen, and so my classes can be, you know, sometimes I have 100 people and sometimes I have 20. And so one of the things I've learned is to, in my face-to-face classes especially, is the first day is to ask them, talk to them about what they're here to get out of in college, what they want. And, you know, is it just come in here and sit down and go through the motions, make a grade and forget everything you supposedly learned in 5 minutes? 5 minutes after the course, or if you want to become better at learning on your own and all those things. And people, these students, they do tend to obviously want to find the easy way out. And I tell them that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's what we do with technology. We're finding easier ways to do things. But at the end of the day, all of them really do want to learn how to learn and be better lifelong learners. And so when you start posing questions like that and asking them, so, you know, what are you really here to do? And how is the best way to do this? What they inevitably, the road they inevitably choose is, if I go home and do a lot of work and then I come back to class, then we can actually, you know, do things that is not busy work. We can actually, be engaged more and actually make further strides than if we just came here and expected you to talk to us. And so it's getting that student buy-in. You have to sort of make them realize that learning is an active endeavor, and that the best place to learn is in the classroom, doing things rather than just having somebody talk to them. The other thing that I tell faculty, because again I deal with freshmen, is always trust your students, because they want to trust you, they need to trust you, but if you expect them to do that, you have to trust them too. And I've seen so many faculty, some of them have been around for 30 years, and you get that feeling they're like a prison guard and they're looking for the person that's cheating. And that sort of drives me nuts. So, you know, students do cheat, but I think they're more likely to cheat if you give them the sort of the vibe that you're expecting it.
I love that so much. You could not see me, Richard, but my head is just nodding the entire time that you're talking. Um,
Yeah.
if this whole presentation had a subtitle, it would be trust your students. Trust them in the same way that you want them to trust you, and also recognize that we can never really know everything that's going on in a student's life and why they do what they do or don't do. And I think that's never been more true than now, when everyone is going through real pain and real trauma. That for me, working with faculty in different ways, I think people feel like I don't want to be tricked. I don't want students to trick me. I don't want students to, get one over on me. And I think that if that's the worst thing that happens to you, that if a student tricks you and, their grandma hasn't really died, then that's fine. I think we could probably live with that if what it means is that the student gets the time that they need. So I cannot thank you enough for sharing that. Trust your students. And I also really liked what you said about students wanting an opportunity to learn how to learn. There's a great book on this by Sandra McGuire called, I think, something like Teach Students to Learn, interestingly enough, that talks about the role that metacognition plays in learning and giving students an opportunity to develop those skills that they need to be a successful student. So thank you so much for sharing that. Really, really appreciate it. I'm gonna move on. I think everyone touched on these things. So what does ethical behavior look like in your discipline? These are just a few things to add on to what everyone already said. Being present and engaged yourself also means that you're modeling ethical practices, you're citing your sources, you're crediting your images. You're getting to know your students as much as you can. I think, what's the saying? Something like prejudice exists in abstraction. The more we know our students and where they're coming from, the more apt we are to give them space and room and the benefit of the doubt. Creating community in your classes, having students be a part of setting course policies, explaining the purpose and logic behind your course design. I think this relates to what you were talking about, Richard, asking students, what is it that you want to get out of this class? And then you can say, you want to get this out of the class? Here's our learning outcome. We're going to be talking about this thing that you mentioned that's important to you here, here, and here. And again, also exploring what it means to be ethical in your field. Moving on now to talking specifically about the sort of assignment and the assessment level. I found this tweet that I wanted to share with everyone that really resonated with me, and I'm wondering what your reactions to it are. It says, the best thing ever said to me about assessments was, when in your adult life has anyone ever taken all your digital devices and books away and then asked you to complete a task? The best assessment I ever gave was a standards-based WebQuest final. And if you're not familiar with WebQuest, they're basically like online scavenger hunts. But you're basically given the entire internet to solve questions. A lot of people are talking about sort of case studies, but it's understanding information and your information need and your problem within a larger context. So this, what this author is describing is something called sequestered problem solving. And this is the approach and the framework for a lot of tests and quizzes and things like that. So sequestered problem solving, the idea is that you're answering questions in isolation without access to outside resources. So this is called essentially replicative learning. And this also reminds me, if anyone is interested in the field of critical pedagogy, Paulo Freire has a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, the Oppressed. He has a lot of books, actually. It's a pretty important dude, but he writes about what's called a banking concept of education that keeps students passive, in which basically students are just asked to bank everything that the instructor is telling them and then recite it, but there's no real application of learning, no transfer, no depth of learning. What Bransford and Schwartz instead advocate for is something called preparation for future learning. And these are assessments, these are assignments that measure someone's ability to learn in knowledge-rich environments, because we live in a knowledge-rich environment. When I was a librarian, what this meant for me was I'm not going to teach you how to use every single piece of a database. Instead, what I'm going to teach you is how generally databases, research databases are configured, how they're organized. That way, you know what to expect, and you are able to sort of maneuver your way through Google, through JSTOR, through the library website, even if you have never seen it before. So this, something like application versus replication. And these are just some ideas that I wanted us to think about when we're talking about assessments and assignments. I realize that maybe these approaches are different in different disciplines, but I'm wondering if we can sort of think about what our assignments and our assessments would look like if what we were looking at was preparation for future learning, empowering students to be able to encounter different situations that might not just be exactly the question that you ask them on the test. Branchford and Schwartz write that the better students are prepared for future learning, the greater the transfer. So with that in mind, let's now talk about designing assignments and designing assessments. So assessments, your quizzes, your tests, assignments, you know, basically everything else, your discussion boards, your essays, things like that. One principle for this is to articulate your learning goals and then create assignments that align specifically with those goals. And hopefully we can see how this relates to that same principle on our course design of helping students understand why they're doing what they're doing and what they're going to get out of it. So engaging in higher order thinking in assignment design that will allow students to apply learning and also demonstrate capacity for future learning. So it's not just, you know, 1 + 1 = what, it is, you know, what's the larger idea behind this particular problem. But then you can take that idea, you can take that framework, and you can apply it to anything else. We've talked about this a little bit so far, but emphasizing learning over grades. Someone already mentioned the great idea of having more lower stakes assignments, and also finding ways to play to students' strengths as another way to invest them in the process, give them an opportunity to shine, to be successful. So I'm wondering what your reactions are to these strategies. Have you used any in your classroom? What does it look like practically? What actions are associated with these? Any thoughts? Maybe specifically, since we were already talking about trusting students, what are you doing to play to your students' strengths? Maybe it has to do with giving them more opportunity for autonomy.
I was trying to write this in the chat, but it's going to take too long. So this is Kim. I tried a thing called gaming my syllabus that I heard in some other webinar along the way. And I don't know if anyone else has tried this, but it turned out kind of interesting, especially during the pandemic. I think it was a good thing. But basically, I have tons of assignments that students can choose from, and you just add up their points for a total. And so it's kind of like, you know, playing a video game and you get to the next level if you get so many points. So many points earns you a C, and then more points earns you a B, and more points earns you an A. And so my grades definitely were higher, which I'm still kind of trying to figure out what the sweet spot of the cutoff points are. But it definitely gave them choices, because so then I just had a bunch of different kinds of assignments. So and I said, if this one helps you learn better, then choose that one, kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's, again, investing students in the process of it as well. I think about opportunities in the past. We think about our own work. It's much more difficult to say, here, Jessica, you have to do this one thing. I don't care whether you want to do it or not. Or here's a number of different projects we're working on. Which one do you think you would be best at? Which one plays to your strengths? You're going to be much more invested in doing that fun one that plays to your strengths. That's fantastic. Allison, instead of having a high stakes, stressful final project, assigns all the pieces of the final during the course as drafts. And students can focus on the learning instead of the grade, and they get feedback on each draft. That's such a great idea. Sort of chunking up bigger projects, that way students can get feedback, they can make changes, and then the emphasis really is on the learning process. I can show you how much I have learned from one draft to the other, as opposed to I get one shot. Maybe I didn't know what you were expecting. Maybe I didn't know how to do this correctly. It's really a way that you can set students up to be successful. These are great, thank you. Some other ideas related to these is explaining the purpose of assignments and assessments and how they'll be meaningful to students outside of the class. And again, I love that idea of having students, giving students an opportunity to practice in class. If that is, thanks so much for coming, Kim. If that is giving students an opportunity to work on something in a lab, if that's giving students an opportunity to read something together in class and ask, I don't understand what this means. Higher order thinking and assignments. People have already mentioned case studies, other authentic assignments, open book quizzes and exams, something like that WebQuest final, open-ended questions that allow students to demonstrate to you how they're making connections, stuff like problem-based learning, giving some kind of larger problem that a student or a group can solve together. Many low stakes and low points assignments that give students an opportunity to demonstrate learning and growth, turning in larger projects and drafts and stages, giving students to play to their strengths, different assignment formats, give them an opportunity to do different topics. In the past, I've let students turn in their final as a video, as a song, as a poem, as a record. What is something that they're good at that would allow them to express themselves in a way that is meaningful and authentic to themselves? Charlotte has a take-home final that can be a future portfolio piece when applying for jobs. We talk about high impact practices a lot, and having portfolios, having things that students can carry with them outside of the classroom is so valuable. We talk about giving students an idea of how what they're doing is going to be meaningful to them in their lives and their careers. That is such an amazing way to do that. All right, I know we're going through these things pretty quickly. I just want to sort of begin to wrap up by touching on some equity, privacy, and pedagogical concerns with proctoring and anti-plagiarism software. These are things that have really come to the forefront over the last couple of years. They're more and more popular, even as more and more students in particular, but also faculty, are raising a lot of issues with these things. So proctoring software is something like Proctorio. That's the one that we use the most in CU. This is something that monitors a student, often through a webcam, but there are also programs that can take control of a student's computer. So this makes sure that students sometimes will have to put up their ID to show who they are. It monitors their gaze, where they're looking, make sure that there's enough light that they can see students. As we'll talk about in a second, that has caused a lot of issues for students who aren't white. And also anti-plagiarism software. The most popular one is Turnitin, that checks student work against a database to find a percentage of similarity with other materials in that database. This is a very quick overview of these issues. At the end, there's a list of readings if you want to learn more about these things. But some of the concerns, specifically with proctoring software, is that it creates issues for Black, Indigenous people of color, for trans people, for non-binary people, as well as people with disabilities and neuroatypical people. It will flag you if it's doing something that it feels like is not right, and that might just be, you know, you trying very hard and very earnestly to take the test. But these programs are built by people and with the bias that those people have, and they're very often built for white people. So it makes it difficult with things like lighting, with things like the eye tracking, to make that equitable and fair experience. It also will scan the room that a student is in. I have a small apartment and my office is also my bedroom. So basically now if I did this, this company would have a scan, an image, a recording of my bedroom. If you are a student who maybe is working at an economic disadvantage, maybe you would feel self-conscious about that. Just having people being accountable for their spaces in this way is kind of disturbing. But at the heart of it, these programs have done real emotional damage to students. They have wept with stress, urinated at their desk because they can't leave. If the camera sees someone else in the back room, understanding specifically, you know, on the Auraria campus, people are working other jobs, they've got kids, they've got family members living with them. But if the camera sees someone else in the background, then the student can be flagged. If they live in a dorm room, it's potential exam collusion. If you really feel like having a depressing Tuesday afternoon, there are Twitter feeds that are just capturing tweets from students who are crying and frustrated because something went wrong with their proctorio test. And it's pretty disturbing. With something like Turnitin, there were real issues in terms of intellectual property. The essays that students submit become a part of the Turnitin database. That database is then sold to universities. And it also, I think, if we talk about trusting our students and how important that is to us, it already makes students feel like they've done something wrong, even if they haven't. That you assume that they have done something wrong. There are all kinds of other ways, as we've talked about, to put students in a position where you trust them and you're sort of working towards sort of sense of mutual respect and trust and reciprocity. And this, I think, affects that culture. So again, I know that's a quick overview of these things. They're very important. There have been letters specifically at CU Denver advocating for the university to not use proctorio specifically. But see at the end, if this is something that you're interested in, I'm happy to talk to you more about this. There's all kinds of resources at the university to learn more about these concerns and also alternatives. So to begin to wrap up, these are sort of the session takeaways, or what I hope the takeaways are. Academic integrity is not just the responsibility of the student. The more students are engaged, the less they'll be inclined to cheat. Designing for engagement and integrity is just better pedagogy. It's kinder, it's more empathetic. How we are oriented in our design matters. We should be designing to encourage learning, not to avoid cheating. And also, we should trust our students. we should aim for empathy in our teaching and design and not punishment. So just a sort of thing to think about as we go off into the rest of the day and the week, as you teach your classes, sort of think about how you're oriented in your design. Are you setting things up? Are you designing things to help students succeed? Are you designing things to avoid plagiarism and cheating? As we talked about, it could be possible that we accomplish both of those things at the same time. But I think how you're oriented, how you begin, what you think and feel when you're putting these things together matters. Here's what we're excited. I will tell you everything on this list, you can access it today. All of the books are available right now as ebooks on the Rary Library. And there's various magazine articles and stuff that you can find in the wilds of Google. I will open it up now. If you have any questions about anything or any thoughts that you want to share, I will say thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your engagement. I know this is heavy for this point in the semester, but we would love to hear how we can improve. This is a link, bit.ly/ODE training, just for your feedback on this particular webinar. We're going to be offering it again in March. So everything that you have to offer, we will absolutely take it seriously. So thank you. But are there any questions, thoughts, concerns?
Thank you, Jessica. This is Carlos. Real quick, just a couple of thoughts as I go over and reflect on the great presentation. I also wanted to point out that a lot of the great points that you make over here and the options that we can work with are also dependent on, for example, instructors. We teach a heavy load. And when we have 5 classes in a semester with about 300 students per semester, some of these are not really options that we can actually go into. Like, for example, the typical discussion of the death of the thread of discussion, because sometimes it's impossible to just, comment on every single student, every class, and then who commented and why do you comment on Carlos's post and not on my post, and why is his better than mine, et cetera, et cetera. So, that whole sense of community sometimes is somewhat difficult to achieve, especially when we're talking about different assignments. When you try to do group exercises, who emailed who didn't email who, and then everybody emails you, who's doing the work, who's not doing the work. So it can be a little bit complicated at the end. And then I was thinking also about the integrity of the assignments. For example, the exams. You cannot write a new exam every semester. So keeping that integrity for the exam, there's so much you can do, of course, and it's very limited. But yes, I do trust the students, and I do not write my assignments or create my assignments with with the guilty assumption at all. And like some people were discussing before, I also go ahead and I tell them, instead of memorizing concepts, just learn what they really mean and how to apply them. And that's one way of doing this. But I just wanted to throw those few thoughts over there. I don't know if they add to anything here at the end, but those were my thoughts so far. So thank you for everything. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Carlos. I think that's absolutely an important consideration, a huge part of this, especially now moving online. I mean, teaching a huge survey class online, it's different than teaching it face-to-face, and teaching it face-to-face was already very complicated. We're all, I think, operating with an economy of time issue. But I think that it sounds to me from what you're describing that your work and your projects are already necessarily going to be kinder, more empathetic because of how you're oriented towards your students. I think it's worthwhile, and I would love to have another webinar for us to talk about how we can do things like creating communities in a super big class. As you were talking, I'm thinking about, more small group work, making use of things like rubrics to ease and quicken grading and feedback. But you're right, at the end of the day, we're human beings with lives the same way that students are. And all you can do is the best that you can do. And that's a lot, and that's important. But going into these spaces, trusting your students and caring about their learning experiences, even as it's not going to be perfect and we're not going to be able to accomplish all of the fun, different choices and, you know, video assignments and discussions and group work that we want to. It's going to be better. It's just going to be better because you care. So thank you for caring and thank you for your comment.
Oh, no problem at all. And that just a little bit, just one little thing to add. You know, we can have graders, TAs, of course, that can be of great help. Absolutely, that's very true. But once again, it's just the students complaining or disengaging because the discussion didn't go well or because you didn't react to the specific point or the specific post. That's really hard sometimes to overcome. And you know, you cannot teach a class to make everybody happy because that will probably never happen. But at the same time, you want to be as inclusive as possible and of course, as engaging as possible. And you use the resources that you have. And once again, I really try, but it's always a learning process, even after however many years you do it. So thank you so much for all the pointers. I really appreciate the presentation.
Thank you, Carlos. And I just want to validate how you're feeling. I felt that exact same way. I think we would all love to be able to give everyone as meaningful an experience as we absolutely can. But at some point, you know, we also have to recognize that like we can't control people's experiences and what they do. We just have to try our best. And that is still a lot. And then after we try our best, we have to get some hot cocoa and look at the snow and be moved by it and, you know, watch a TV show and go to bed at 9 p.m. and take care of ourselves. So, all right. So again, thank everyone so much for coming and thank you for sharing and thank you for engaging. You will get a follow-up email with the recording and you will also get the slide deck for this presentation. Please, if you get a second, give us some feedback in our link here, bit.ly.ode training. If you want to follow up, please feel free to reach out to me. And also Office of Digital Education, my colleagues, including Braden, we can meet with you one-on-one to sort of talk about any sort of issues that you might be having in your class, Canvas, Zoom, all kinds of things like that. Just reach out and let us know. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day. Stop sharing. Get out in that snow. It's magical. I'm from Florida. This is magical to me. All right. Thank you so much.